I believe there are three things the New Orleans Saints absolutely must get right in order to find success in 2024, and it all starts in the trenches. We get all that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host and your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I've got three things I think the New Orleans Saints must get right in 2024 in order to find success. We'll take a look at how the defense plays an enormous role in the team's ability to find success on the offensive side of the football, why the run game sets the tone for everything, and why the trenches matter, because you've got to keep Derek Carr clean in 2024. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being an everydayer and making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed over at Game Time. Download the app today. Terms apply. I believe that the most important unit for the New Orleans Saints is going to be their offensive line, and the offensive line will be the way by which the New Orleans Saints offense either finds success or falls flat on its face. And we're going to find out very quickly, very early, which way this is going to trend. We might even get some ideas of it next month in training camp. So that's where I want to start today. We're also going to take a look at the run game. We're going to take a look at the defense too and how that all impacts with this new offense. But I want to clarify here that, look, for any team in the NFL, if the offensive line is struggling, if the run game can't get going, and if the defense is faltering, no team in the NFL is winning games. So the New Orleans Saints are not in a unique, quote unquote, position here, but with the installation of a brand new offense, these three elements that we're going to highlight today are particularly important to the team right off the bat, as opposed to something they might be able to overcome over the course of the season's ongoing time. So let's start with the offensive line, because for me, everything starts with keeping Derek Carr clean. We saw Derek Carr take way too many hits, have way more injuries, and miss more time than anyone expected that he was going to miss in his first year with the New Orleans Saints. 3 different halves he was knocked out of games. And I think that not protecting Carr is not an option for this New Orleans Saints offensive line, which effectively has 2 surefire things, right? Surefire players out of the 5 potential starters that it will have in 2024 set at this point. Erik McCoy at center, Cesar Ruiz at right guard, both talented. Both are going to be playing to their strengths in terms of the athleticism that this particular offensive system is going to ask for them to have out on the field. We've already seen Cesar Ruiz slim down and be having a blast out on the field when he's out there during mini camps and OTAs and all these other things. I think all of that stuff matters, but you've got 3 big question marks. Will Trevor Penning work at right tackle / will Trevor Penning take the steps forward that he needs to take in order to prove that he is a starting tackle in this league? Who will be the starting left guard for the New Orleans Saints? And of course, how quickly would Taliese Fuaga, even with moving over to the left tackle spot, end up having a settling in? And can he reach that all-pro level or even that Pro Bowl level of tackle play that will help to elevate this offense? And on top of all that becomes a question that looms over really everything we're going to discuss today. So I'm going to say it once and get out of the way. Yes, injuries are a factor. So health, of course, changes the way that the course of this conversation goes all throughout the season. But I think you have to work very hard in terms of keeping Derek Carr clean and comfortable. And I think a part of the system and a part of the scheme can help with that too, in terms of getting the ball out quickly. But I think that has to be a huge emphasis for this team to prove in 2024 in order for them to really get going. This episode isn't really about what will make the New Orleans Saints bad. It's really about what makes them good, what turns things around, particularly on the offensive side going into 2024. And it starts with the offensive line. The other thing that I think you have to see from this offensive line is that they have to be able to move off that line of scrimmage in the run game. They have to be fast. They have to be aggressive. They have to be athletic, all those things. And I think that ends up taking this run game up to the next level. They weren't necessarily asked to be that way, or at least are being coached in a way that's different now than the way that they were being coached last year. And that could be because of what they're being asked to do with Klint Kubiak's game plan versus Pete Carmichael's game plan. It could be the coaching styles of the new offensive line coach, John Benton, versus the coaching style of the former offensive line coach, Doug Marrone. But in any case, something is different about how this New Orleans Saints offensive line flies off the snap. So far, what we've seen through minicamps and OTAs. Looking forward to seeing more of that come training camp and, of course, during the regular season as well. But I want to give you two numbers here, or really a couple of numbers, but two main numbers here to kind of give you an understanding of why this is important. And we're going to get to the run game here in a little bit. But the thing that I want to look at here is how the offensive line can reset the line of scrimmage. You've heard me talk about this if you're an everydayer here on the show, and you certainly heard about it all throughout the season last year if you were here, was that the New Orleans Saints offensive line didn't seem like an offensive line that reset the line of scrimmage, or instead of running backs having to breach the trenches, right, the defensive line, the offensive line at the line of scrimmage, or rather downfield a little bit, you're hoping that the offensive line is pushing the defensive line back, right? And then so that way there's more what we call yards before contact, the opportunity for that running back to gain some yards before they even hit defensive resistance. And the Saints offensive line didn't do that consistently. Oftentimes they were either pushed back or the line of scrimmage was truly the line of scrimmage as the point of contact. So just to illustrate that, Alvin Kamara was 28th out of 49 running backs last year that ran over 100 rushing attempts when it came to yards before contact at just 2.4 yards before contact. So he's well into the bottom half of that conversation. Jamal Williams was 48th of 49. Second worst when it came to yards before contact. These are not running back stats. These are blocking scheme stats. These are play calling stats, things like that. So it just goes to show you that these guys who didn't have the greatest yards after contact, to be fair, last year either, weren't really getting the run game set up in front of them. The offensive line was not creating yards for them. That's a place where this New Orleans Saints offensive line has got to win in those trenches. I think the other thing too is maybe a little bit of mentality stuff, but establishing a level of physicality that a defensive line now has to outlast. You get the opportunity here with some confidence in your new system and in your new scheme to establish a level of, well, dominance with the guys that line up across from you. And I think the New Orleans Saints offensive line doing that creates sort of a swag and attitude that permeates through the rest of the game plan, keeps the Saints on a little bit more of an attacking mentality because they're proving to be bigger and stronger and tougher than the guys in front of them. And I think the offensive line has to set that tone. So I think it's all about setting that tone of physicality. It's all about making sure that they're keeping the run game dynamic so that they're able to move off the line and, of course, resetting that offensive line and that line of scrimmage, as well as, of course, protecting their quarterback. But behind all of that, too, it's not just the offensive line. The running backs, the run game, the play calling, they have to do their job as well of setting up this run game so that the rest of this offense can indeed be successful, because a lot of it is going to be predicated on the rushing attack. Let's get to that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, the absolute must-stop destination for last-minute tickets for all the biggest events in your area. I use Game Time all the time, whether I'm in town or out of town. If I'm just looking for something to do on a random night and I want to check out and see if there's any big events going on, Game Time is my destination. Allows me to be spontaneous, keep things fresh, do something fun that I might not plan, but hey, I've got the itch to go out and do something. Game Time helps me scratch that itch quite a bit with their last-minute deals. Folks save up to 60% by buying last-minute tickets through Game Time for sporting events, concerts, comedy, theater, music, and much more. You also get all-in pricing, an option you can toggle on so you're not taken by surprise with fees, things like that. And of course, views from your seat so that you can take all of the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. That's all it takes. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family, if you're looking for another reason why the New Orleans Saints would have it in their best interest to make sure that things go well with Alvin Kamara over the course of this offseason, establishing the run game and then being able to predicate everything else in your offense off of it is an absolute must for this New Orleans Saints new wide zone offensive system. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream as well. None of the yelling and screaming you're to get from all the other networks, just the biggest stories covered from the local experts that know their teams the best without all of the shouting. You can find it over on the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page and on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. Go ahead and check them out. Locked On Sports Today, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So for me, the next big thing, number two, when it comes to what's most important for the New Orleans Saints to get their offense off the ground and find success early on in the 2024 season, it all comes down to the run game. And the biggest thing that I look at first is that we talked about Derek Carr and kind of protecting Derek Carr to open the show. I think that the run game helps to take a little bit of that pressure off of Derek Carr and the needs of the passing game as well. Locked On Dolphins host Kyle Krabs recently just had Kurt Warner on the show. And they were talking a little bit about Tua Tagovailoa and the idea of a system quarterback and all these other things. I think Derek Carr needs to be a system quarterback, quote unquote, because I don't think system quarterback is an insult. I think every quarterback in the NFL is a system quarterback. That's how every player in the NFL is a system player. It's how it works. You play in a system. Therefore, you are what you play. So, but I thought one of the things that was really interesting that he talked about in all of that was that when it came to taking pressure off of quarterbacks and things like that, that sometimes the system doesn't do you any favors. He talked about getting over to the New York Jets, for instance. And when he was with the New York Jets, the idea was to run the ball early, play defense, and then only throw on third downs when they needed to. Like that was kind of the game plan, or really only throw when they needed to. But they were predicated on trying to use the run game as the main source of their offense, not as a complementary piece to their passing game, which maybe fits a little bit more of the greatest show on turf approach with, Marshall Faulk. And I'm sure it didn't hurt that he had guys like Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt and Ricky Prohl and all these other great players as well. But you get what I'm saying? There's a big difference between leaning in on your run game to be the sole producer of your offense. You're not going to win games in the NFL that way. But then also elevating it or leveraging it as a complement to the other parts of your game. So I think that having a run game takes a little bit of the pressure off of Derek Carr and the passing game, but also complements it in such a way that it sets up things that we know Derek Carr are very good at, which would be the play action passes. So whether it's Alvin Kamara, whether it's Jamal Williams, whether it's Kendre Miller, certainly you hope that Alvin Kamara, of course, is the main contributor amongst that group. Setting up and being able to produce in the run game enough to help to boost the play action pass, I think has to be a big focus. The NOLA News team did a really great compilation taking a look at the 87 play action passing attempts that Derek Carr had last year, and he was outstanding. Completed 73.6% of those passes, averaged over 9 yards per attempt on those plays, and also compiled a 116.1 passer rating in the meanwhile. So I took those 87 play action passes and I decided to say, you know what, how many play action passes might Derek Carr get in this new Klint Kubiak offense? And one of the big things that I did was I went back to 2021 where Klint Kubiak was the play caller and offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings. And that number leapt from 87 to 113 play action passes for Kirk Cousins back in 2021. I could imagine the number being even higher for the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr this year when it comes to play action passes. So Alvin Kamara and the run game absolutely need to be on point in order to make sure you're able to maximize the effectiveness of play action. The dirty little secret across the NFL is that even if you don't have a run game going, play action is still going to work because almost every defensive player, certainly amongst the front seven, and then if a safety's playing in the box and things like that, of course, they qualify in that number as well. But everybody's first responsibility is stop the run. Then they adjust to the pass. The obvious exceptions of that are cornerbacks, maybe deep safeties, things like that. But you're always got your eyes on the backfield first. Is it a run? No, it must be a pass. Okay, let me get to my passing responsibilities. And so the dirty little secret is that play action works no matter what, but you can still maximize the efficiency, the effectiveness of the play action pass by having a good run game and a solid run game. So that's got to be a big thing. The other thing that I look at too, in terms of setting up that play action pass, which also takes pressure off of Derek Carr because it makes the job a little bit easier, but you can also control the game with the run game. Let's say that you end up in a situation to where you are leading by 17 points going into a second half. Sound familiar? There should be an opportunity for you to be able to just show up, run the ball effectively, get back to this first thing that we were talking about because you've established the physicality with your offensive line, and now your run game is able to chip away and gain 4 yards every play. If you can gain 4 yards every play, you're winning every single game. No one is stopping you at that point. If you're able to demand or command that type of production, you're not literally going to gain 4 yards every play, of course. But if you're able to consistently move the ball forward, keep the clock running, control the game, keep the ball in your hands and out of the hands of the opposing team, that's where we get to the moniker. You throw the ball to score points, you run the ball to win games. You have to be able to control the game with the run game. And that's one of the ways that you do that. And that's one of the benefits of being able to do that, is that you win those games when you have those leads as opposed to blowing those leads in the second half. So we talked about setting up the play action. We talked about controlling the game. We talked about taking pressure off of Derek Carr. The other thing that I want to go back to, and it's pretty similar to the idea of establishing the physicality, it's wearing down the defense before you get the opportunity to attack. So when I highlight this, I think that the other thing that I really like about it is that it's not just about the offensive line being bigger and stronger than the defensive line that's out in front of them. Certainly that is a good point, right? We were just talking about establishing physicality. That's a big point of that. But also, if your running backs are constantly colliding with these defensive players and able to wear down that defense a bit and keep them running, keep them on the field for longer drives with more plays, 10, 12 play drives by running the football, a la the opening drive against the Baltimore Ravens a few years ago. That big rushing game back in, I want to say it was 2017 against the Buffalo Bills, where they ran for an enormous amount of rushing yards and like everybody had a rushing touchdown in that game. That is the situation to where you are beating down a defense and thereby taking advantage of what you get to, what you have available to you, because they don't have the energy to stop you. And so I think that becomes another big part of the run game as well. Now you got to be able to throw the football. You got to be able to move the ball through the air, all those other things. But I do think that predicating your success on the run game is a kind of quintessential part of what a wide zone Kubiak offense wants to do. The New Orleans Saints certainly have the talent to get it done if what we discussed in the first segment is true, that the offensive line can come together in this situation. And I think that would put the New Orleans Saints in a really, really good situation to where they can be more successful right off the bat with their offense, because you're kind of buying yourself some time in terms of what you're able to do with the run game to get the passing game really dialed in, get the motion and all that stuff really, honed in, and then be able to attack through the air after you've worn down a defense. The other thing that's really going to help this New Orleans Saints offense early on in the season is having a defense it can rely upon. And this New Orleans Saints defense has been very good since 2017 and absolutely cannot take a step back in 2024. Let's discuss why as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Summertime is here. You know what that means. MLB, WNBA, and much, much more. And you can bet on it all over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets that you can then use on everything from who's going to hit a home run out of the park. You can even do home run parlays or who's going to get a hit parlays. And of course, you can get in on the great WNBA action as well. Later on today, later on in the evening, the New York Liberty, the New York Liberty taking on and hosting the Los Angeles Sparks, 14.5-point favorites after the devastating injury to rookie sensation Cameron Brink, who Los Angeles just lost. So that's a great place to go to place a bet, your first $5 bet, and win that $200 in bonus bucks if you get that right. That's a heavy favorite over in New York. So go check it out today. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Believe it or not, the New Orleans Saints defense will have a massive impact on its ability to be successful with its new offense. We got that coming up for you here as we wrap up today's episode. Don't forget, we are your team every day. And coming up on tomorrow's episode, with all of the offseason extension talks ongoing for all these other teams, New Orleans Saints haven't had to be a part of that conversation. So what I want to do is take a look and see who's next for New Orleans in terms of getting extensions. Guys like Paulson Adebo, Pete Werner are on that list. And of course, even looking ahead to the guys that might be the market setters like Chris Olave. So I'll break all of that down in tomorrow's episode as we wrap up the week. But here, what I want to take a look at is how the defense and its identity, right? How it has to be the identity of the team while the New Orleans Saints offense gets into rhythm. So I think that right now, the defense is the identity of the New Orleans Saints team. I think that the New Orleans Saints offense has found its identity in motion, play action, creativity, innovation, disguise, I think is the word that I would use to describe both sides of the football now. But overall, the overwhelming identity or, you're heavy in this team, if anybody's a gamer, that is definitely the New Orleans Saints defense, led by Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu amongst the veteran group, and then still, these really young playmakers as well, like Paulson Adebo and Marshon Lattimore and Carl Granderson. They added Chase Young. You've got Willie Gay. You've got Pete Werner in the second level. There's lots of these pieces now that end up being able to contribute to your team's identity. And I think that for the Saints, instead of being so concerned with the idea of can we looking at it from their perspective, can we get this offense running early? You can kind of sit back and give yourself a little bit of a break from being concerned about that if your defense is cooking early, because it's buying your offense time to get in rhythm. It's getting the ball back to your offense to make sure that they are able to get those reps, which is what it will take to get in rhythm. The New Orleans Saints offense might not look great week 1, week 2, week 3, especially with fewer starters playing in preseasons these days. There only being 3 preseason games, all those other things. May effectively having to make the leap from training camp to the regular season, as we saw last year, can't really be assisted, quantified, boosted, whatever, by a drive in the preseason, right? We saw that last year. Saints had that one touchdown drive against, the Chargers, if I recall correctly, in the preseason. And then we all went, oh, wow, this might actually work. And then it took 12 weeks for the offense to really get into rhythm. So we can't really predicate what the New Orleans Saints offense is going to look like in season based upon what we see in training camp on a 1-to-1 ratio. We can kind of take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. We can see, hey, this is working, but you're still looking for, can it work at another level? That's the next thing you're looking for. Anybody ever see that Keegan Michael Key interview where he talks to Exhibit and The Rock? He's like a whole nother level. That's my reference there. The other thing that I think really, really helps when your defense is cooking, it limits the points scored by the opposing team, which then means that your offense isn't in a situation to where it has to go one-dimensional. So what I mean by that is that if you are the New Orleans Saints defense and the last couple times they played the Detroit Lions, they've gotten into this situation where the Detroit Lions go out there, they get a touchdown, they get a turnover right away on the first offensive drive of the New Orleans Saints offense, and then they score another touchdown. And you're down 14-0, well, you're probably going to have to throw the football. You're probably going to have to move the football through the air and go down there and try to score some points. That becomes more so even the case if that is a 14-point or a multiple score deficit in the second half, right? You kind of have to let the run game go, and you got to be able to pass the football. You got to get the ball to the end zone. You got to be able to save some of the clock. You got to move the ball quickly, all these other things. But if your defense is holding up, while your offense is learning, okay, how do we get in the rhythm, right? How do we all play the same beat here? And the offense takes the field in the second half, knotted up 3-3. If your offense can get in the rhythm, then you have the advantage, right? And one of the big things that the Saints struggled with last season was scoring points early. If that's going to be the case early on in the season here for New Orleans in 2024, which again, I think could be the case because I don't expect them to be fully in rhythm on the offensive side right off the bat, then not allowing the other team to score in the meanwhile helps to keep your offense alive. So I think that ends up being a huge, huge deal, right? It allows you to be able to stay in the game. It allows you to not allow the game to get away from you. And it keeps you from a situation to where you end up having to play that one-dimensional level or that one-dimensional style of football, which again, as we've discussed throughout this entire episode, you have to have multiple dimensions. You have to be dynamic in order for this offensive scheme to work. You have to be able to run the football to set up what you're doing in the passing game. You've got to be able to have that threat of passing and scoring so that you can then turn back to the run game to put the game away, all these other things. So one thing just feeds right to the other. And a lot of that is going to be aided and assisted by what you're trying to find in this New Orleans Saints offense, what you're trying to find through the run game, the passing game, and the type of production or lack of production that you're allowing when it comes to your defense. The other thing that I think that it really helps with too is that you just simply hold everything down while the offense gets in shape. You know what I'm saying? If you're able to help your offense that much, it just makes the need to be perfect right away a little bit less. It widens the margin of error a little bit while you do get accustomed to the new things for your offense. And so I think that the defense ends up being able to do that and being able to help out in that way as well. And as we mentioned earlier, it never hurts to steal those extra possessions, right? Those interceptions, those fumbles, the turnovers, the takeaways that you can create as a defense. You're just giving your offense more and more opportunities to be able to get in the rhythm, figure out who they are, learn how to operate within that new identity, and do so with the comfort of the defense that you know, to where like, hey, if it doesn't work this time, this drive, it's unlikely that you're going to be surrendering a 7-point swing or a 14-point swing because of it. It's just they'll get the ball back. And I think you have to have that trust in your defense. But of course, the defense has to have the trust in the offense that if I get you that ball back, you got to do something with it. And I think that's where, the hand-in-hand relationship, the complementary symbiotic relationship between the two has to be in rhythm with one another. It has to truly complement one another. And then I'll say this again, too. If your defense is just beating down the opponent, it's demoralizing for the opponent, which can then translate and permeate over to the offensive side of the football, cause some issues for their offense in terms of getting things going and getting into rhythm and all that stuff. And then your offense gets the opportunity to take advantage of that. So each one of these has sort of that mental aspect of how it impacts the game. And in each case, it's all very important. So defense, offensive line, run game, so that you can predicate your passing game off of it. All these three things have got to be right for the New Orleans Saints, have got to take their steps forward, or in the defensive case, maintain what it is that they do at a high level in order for the Saints to find early season success. They are, to me, the most important pieces of the New Orleans Saints finding success in 2024. And the good news is that every level, defense, run game, offensive line, has the talent to get it done. Again, these are not reasons that the New Orleans Saints will struggle in 2024. These are the reasons that the New Orleans Saints offense can succeed in 2024. And that's the big takeaway, as we said at the very beginning of this episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen of the day every day here on the Locked On Saints podcast. Don't forget to go and check out Matt Moscona over at Locked On LSU, and of course, Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans. Thank you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you. To a whole nother level.